please participants, the panelists have had their say, and I suspect you would like to ask them questions and make brief comments.
I could just read Eddie Meyer's contribution.
Sure.
It says, you don't have phosphorus in the region to make artificial fertilizer. Managing nutrient pollution from agriculture is a major global challenge. Unfortunately, Guyana and Brazil seem to
seem to be on track to follow monoculture food production.
Thank you, Paula.
Nicholas, you wanted to answer that? You wanted to say
No, I'm sorry, Eddie. I just wanted to read to the end because I can see it on my screen.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I wonder if any of the panelists, Ulrich?
Eddie, could you repeat that question for me because it didn't come through clearly.
You don't have phosphorus in the region to make artificial fertilizer. Managing nutrient pollution from agriculture is a major global challenge. Unfortunately, Guyana and Brazil seem to be on track to follow monoculture food production. And I think this relates to an issue that you raised about the JAGDEO initiative. And I wondered if you wanted to make that connection, Neville.
Yeah, well, if we look at the future of the agricultural sector in the Caribbean, certainly monoculture is not something I see if we are looking at supplying the Caribbean market and replacing the billions of dollars imports that we have. What we would ideally want to move to in terms of green agriculture at some point in time is to use organic fertilizers with composting and whatnot. Everything is a transition. While we put all of that in place, I take very seriously the point of the nutrient loads that basically goes into the ocean environment. When we're talking about blue growth, etc., this is a very important consideration. But it's a transition. We're talking about the urea aspect of our fertilizer requirement. But all this, as I said, is transitional. It's not there permanently. Just as gas right now is figuring in Guyana's move towards zero carbon. And I had made the point recently that one thing that is missing there is a sunset clause on the gas facility, which tells you that it's there as a means to an end, and that eventually, once that end is achieved, you move away from the fossil. So this is transition. This is not a permanent situation. And in any case, to keep the agricultural sector alive until such time that we can move to that phase where we change to organic fertilizer, we will have to be importing it from some other foreign source. So the whole idea is to internalize all these issues as much as possible until such time we could move away completely from its use.
Thank you very much. We probably here is, we have a case, we can talk about agriculture and farming practices to alleviate poverty among farmers, reduce emissions, and move towards a less costly green economy. But I wondered if we could really talk a little more about how this COVID-19 experience has highlighted that the green economy requires what you may also call macro critical financial investments. And I think everybody on the panel pointed to that. as priority targets, especially for things like health security and preparedness from future health threats. I wonder if this is something that also can help us to fashion that future that we are looking forward to.
Eddie, I just want to jump in on a very negative note here. COVID, what has been reassuring about COVID is the potential of the global community to sort of put together significant resources, which we haven't seen in the climate change arena, to address the pandemic. The downside is when we look at the result, poor developing countries still don't have access to the vaccine. So the issues raised by my colleague about governance, etc., becomes very important. There are issues that we need to address in terms of access and basically the whole equity question. Just getting the resources together doesn't guarantee fair access and fair distribution. And this is an issue that we will face, we are now facing in the climate change arena.
Thanks a lot.
Yes.
Dr.
Green, I'm a part of the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Development, and they have a program that focuses on post-COVID-19 and the world that we want. And they are examining some very interesting work, concepts, observations on post-COVID-19. And so I think it's a very important question as to how do we integrate the whole idea of what kind of world we want post-COVID-19 into this discussion on oil and gas, as well as climate change. I think also, like Dr. Trotz mentioned, we have seen in terms of financing and mobilizing financing, we've seen it done. COVID-19 has stimulated an urgency that we have not seen as it relates to the environment. But this is where that has, while there was an opportunity, there are so many challenges which have arisen from that in terms of issues of corruption and social justice issues. So even as we discuss the way forward, as Guyana, as becoming a model of, as it relates to climate change and as an oil and gas society economy, we have to integrate the post-COVID-19 idea. The other point I'd like to make is in terms of youth. As I was going through the 2021 Global Risk Report from the World Economic Forum, it was very striking to see as one of the potential risks over the next 0 to 2 years is youth indifference, I think. There was another word that they call it. So even as that's an area that we need to address if we're looking at the youths as the leaders of tomorrow. I found it interesting that the Global Risk Report had identified that as a risk, a potential risk. So I'd also like to add that to our discussion. And even as we think of, or as we rethink our future in terms of Guyana and the regional context.
Eddie, you'll have to unmute. Eddie, you'll have to unmute yourself.
I know that Nicholas wants to speak, but I wonder if I could coax him into responding to this next question from Dr. Terence Blackman. He may also enjoin his response previously. Can you speak to the role of science and technology to the nexus between sustainability, equity, environmental, and other challenges for oil-producing developing countries as they move to a green economy?
Thank you. I thought I'd done the one PhD would be enough, but this is a second challenge. That's a critical question. And I do think without fairness, without equity, COP26 climate change policy is going nowhere. So I think the points made earlier about creating a policy style for the Caribbean and the Commonwealth, which could be emulated more widely. This is slightly tangentially related to the point I wanted to make about post-COVID, and that is the importance of trust in multilateral institutions, that countries should not break commitments they have made, and the risks of vaccine nationalism, which I think breaks the whole concept of equity in international affairs, even for those of us who've benefited from 2 jabs when some people who need them, some countries that need them, have virtually none. But I think the equity consideration is simply central. And I think that Neville might be better placed to answer that question in the sense of some of the recommendations that he was making, specifically with a cap on extraction, if you like, so that the extractive industries have allocations of rights. One might go back to what David Miliband once recommended as a global per capita right to carbon, so that people who used more of it or produced more of it would pay compensation to those who used less. And that would obviously, that could be an international transfer as well as within nation transfers. So carbon budgeting on a per capita basis might be a policy response. But I think until we have proper research into monitoring and evaluation of the beneficiaries and those who pay in all of these policy arenas, I think we won't be able to answer the equity question. And I'm very concerned about COP26, that the UK needs to have the trust of the international community and have its own house and its own wells in order before hosting. But they've got another week, so let's give them time.
Good. Now we have 3 minutes left on this panel, and I want to give the 3 minutes for a final view. 1 minute each from each of the panel. What would you like to tell your policy makers and your leaders as they prepare for COP and as they go to COP to advocate on this issue of climate resilience? Or you can speak directly to the Guyanese leaders, whatever is your wish. 1 minute each. Ulrich?
Oh, definitely the question of access to resources, that we have an implementation deficit when we come to mitigation and adaptation. And the reason is that we have no access to resources. We know what to do. So the message is make the resources available and also remove all of the hoops that we have to jump through to get to those resources. So expeditious access to adequate resources is a sine qua non for us to move forward to zero carbon and climate resilient societies.
Thank you.
Amen.
I would like to say that we need to focus some more on the mechanisms in terms of reforms to implement the challenges and the solutions which have been articulated in our policies. We also need to look at rethinking our policies or policy development. So the mechanisms definitely is important in terms of administrative legislation, institutional reforms, the question of social justice, participation, inclusion, equity, diversity, human rights. Those are issues which are important in all 3 of the sectors, public, private, and civil society sector. Also, as it relates to our investment, international investment norms, I think it's an excellent opportunity. We have an excellent opportunity to harmonize international investment laws with human rights and environmental obligations and standards.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And to you, Nicholas.
Thank you, Chair. I think first I would recommend joined up thinking across the biodiversity and the climate change COPs so that next year the two are dealt with as one. I would also ask them to promote the development of policy analysis skills in the higher education sector, which can include all members of the Caribbean Studies Association, of course. And finally, I think to be more inclusive, I think, as others have said, of civil society views, including in views and the experiences of indigenous peoples, particularly those in forests and in sustainable fishing communities, to protect sustainable livelihoods and the environments for them at very much the grassroots level.
Thank you so much. Co-chairs, you see why I articulated and advocated for 90 minutes. But hopefully we delivered our first step in the relay so that the other panelists, in particular the next one to follow, my good friend, Dr. Delisle Worrell, who is speaking.
Except that he is not on, Eddie, he's not on, he's on and off. So I would suggest that we continue until Delisle, or is Delisle here with us?
He's here.
I am, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
So
my apologies, happy. I didn't see him.
Yeah, good. We would have been delighted to continue, but Delisle, I know that the ball is handed over to good hands and the relay will continue. I want to thank you all for listening. I want in particular to thank Nicholas, Adriana, and Ulrich for the stimulating discussion. As you can see, there is much more to go. And we probably have to enjoin the Vice Chancellor to this task force, given the statements that she made that resonated with the panelists as we discussed the theme here of this panel. Thank you very much, and I look forward to a very successful conference.